Okay, well, we're going to press on to a panel discussion for the last hour before final performance. And I promise you that we will try and make time. We will make time for some questions from the floor. So there will be a mic roving after we've gone through a sort of sequence of questions with our four guests. Let me introduce them to you, starting next to me here. Ellen Ap Robert of Pontio in Bangor. And Ellen has done brilliant work in developing the proposition of Pontio as artistic director. And of course, it's got a key innovation center, which it develops with Bangor University. So it's on the front line of our connections between the arts and the university sector, and arts and science as well, which is crucial. And Ellen is a music graduate and a professional opera singer by training, and she's worked as a music therapist and has worked working with children with learning disabilities across Gwynedd and Ynys Môn. So, welcome to Ellen. And then we have Frank Sodin from the Rowntree Foundation, one of our key British organizations for addressing, understanding, analyzing, and trying to come up with solutions to the problems of poverty. Frank works across the areas of housing, income, and benefits, work, cities, towns, and neighborhoods, and people in society. So I think he covers the whole piece. You're very welcome, Frank. And then Ken Taylor has come to us from the Tetley in Leeds, which I'm sure is not a brewery, but it once was. And Ken Taylor is head of participation at the Tetley. He has a long-standing interest in culture, community, and the urban environment, both as a project manager and a writer. And he developed that in his work in Liverpool, London, and Leeds. So he has wide English and UK experience. And he recently undertook a research trip to the United States to examine socially engaged arts projects in Detroit and Chicago. So he will know why Michigan voted Trump. And finally, we have Guy O'Donnell, who runs Sherman 5, which is a membership-free organization designed to give people from community-first areas or community groups that support people who face barriers and disadvantage and have never attended a performance at the Sherman, the chance to do so. And their work is funded by the Paul Hamlin Foundation, which of course does a lot of work here. Four of us will speak in English, but you'll need your translation achos mae Ellen yn siarad yr hen iaith is speaking Cymraeg. Okay? So, I want to begin with a kind of challenging question, really, to the four of you, which is that most people would agree that the publicly funded arts need to reach out to citizens of all backgrounds and income levels. But there might be a lot of skepticism about how much difference arts engagement and interventions can make to relieving poverty, which is the title of this session, Tackling Poverty. Tackling poverty in the wider society would be understood in relation to housing, jobs, family support, and special support for the young in their schooling. So let's start with the basics. From your own experiences and reflections, how can the arts help those in poverty in their struggle to survive and break out of their oppression? Guy?
Do I need to use the mic?
Yes.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I think what we try to do with the... Hello everyone over there as well, sorry. I've got my back to you. What we try to do with the Sherman 5 project is to use our venue as a cultural hub. So it's obviously a theatre. We programme and produce work in the venue. We support a lot of creatives from across South Wales. But we're a civic space. We're there for everyone. So the reason they may visit is about having time out with friends. It's a social space. We run a volunteer scheme in the venue as well, so there's volunteer opportunities there as well, so there's kind of routes into employment. And we think in terms of tackling poverty, it's about Well, I was thinking a little bit about kind of the questions we might be asked today, and at Tony Lewis's session, we was talking then about engaging with communities, and he said the experts in communities are the people themselves. So we spent a lot of time working with people that we would describe as facing barriers or disadvantage or living in poverty, and ask them, why don't you come to the Sherman? A few people said, what's the Sherman Theatre? They kind of got mixed up with different theatres in Cardiff. Some people haven't attended the theatre in Cardiff. I know that's kind of not the sort of thing to say here. They access no cultural provision. Some people don't do that. So we kind of have conversations about that. We talk about what they like to do with their families. They talk about what they like to do in their spare time. And we have open conversations. And I think that's kind of where we've had some success. It's about, you may have faced disadvantage, you may be living in poverty, but you're not stupid, you're not an idiot, you've got a brain, you're articulate, you can give reasoned responses to why you're not accessing that provision. And I think if we start from that baseline about having the conversation and supporting people that may be living in poverty, then that's a place to go from. And the venue is multifaceted. There's lots of ways to access the building, whether you're interested in drama, music. As I say, it might be just a social space. So it's given those options and completely being open from the start and realising that we don't have the answers. It's about starting the conversation and then going somewhere from that. So that would be my answer.
Thank you, Guy. I want to come to Frank. Frank, I mean, clearly what Guy was pointing us to was that there is poverty of our human life, poverty of our expression and our sense of self, as well as the crushing objective poverty which impacts on all that, of our physical circumstances and having a leaking roof and so on. I mean, is that discourse widely understood amongst those who campaign about poverty?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in fact, we don't draw a distinction. So Joseph Rowntree Foundation published our strategy for solving UK poverty in September, and then a follow-up document aimed at Wales a couple of weeks ago. And how we define poverty is a lack of resources such that you aren't able to meet your basic needs. And we define those basic needs as including social participation, the ability to kind of partake in the kind of conversation that your community or society is having with itself. So for me, in terms of thinking about the role of the arts, the publicly funded arts and poverty, there is just that point, which is actually access is really important, because the very process of kind of giving people access to the arts is a way of relieving a dimension of their poverty. If we think that the best arts help to kind of provoke and further the kind of conversations the society is having with itself. I think there are kind of a number of other ways that the publicly funded arts can make a big contribution to poverty. The first is, just simply the very fact as employers, as organizations, it was really fascinating kind of watching the video and hearing you speak. And obviously, this is an agenda that's really been embraced by the artistic community in Wales. But I guess the one challenge I would sort of place is that a lot of what I heard was still about kind of working with groups and so on. But there's also something just about, well, who are you employing? The Welsh government is actually at the vanguard when you kind of think about the UK governments, in terms of thinking about how public procurement kind of can have an impact on sort of wider employment outcomes for people who are further from the labour market. And that often means taking more risks with who you hire, but kind of assuming that will pay off in the long term. I think finally the area where the arts can have a particularly big impact is around storytelling. I mean, fundamentally, if we're going to solve poverty, it does involve some sort of conversation about how we organize and distribute resources in our society. And that discussion is hampered by kind of caricatures on both sides of the debate. I absolutely agree. I'm not arguing for kind of instrumentalism or propagandization. I think, however, the arts have a really important role in sort of cutting to the heart of human experience and helping people kind of understand different perspectives and those people's experiences themselves. So that's about neither valorizing nor demonizing people in poverty, but kind of sort of capturing the full nuance of what it is to be in poverty, to kind of accept that sometimes it's about wider structural factors, sometimes it's about mistakes people make in their own lives. But sort of adding kind of texture to that is, I think, makes a very important kind of contribution to our understanding of what's going on, and hopefully makes us kind of more sympathetic citizens as well.
Well, thank you, Frank. If you could pass that to Ellen. I mean, that's a very strong challenge about our employment practices, and really significant challenge to all of us here. Ellen, I'll ask the question in Saesneg, but I mean, clearly the whole question of poverty is rich, and it's strange, isn't it? Poverty is a rich subject, and there are many dimensions of poverty, and that's what Frank's been talking to us about. But if I were to sort of ask the lump and crass reductive question, you know, have you in your own arts experience seen people lifted out of crushing objective poverty?
Diolch am y cwestiwn, dwi'n mynd i ateb yn Gymraeg os gai. Dwi'n meddwl mai cyfrannu medrwn ni wneud, fedrwn ni'n honni yn bod ni'n mynd i ateb y broblem a chyfrannu gyda'n gilydd hefo phartneriaid hefyd. Ond o'n i'n cael yn haro gan yr hyn oeddech chi'n dweud ynglyn â straeon, ynglyn â deud straeon. A pha mor bwysig ydy yn bod ni yn rhoi llais i'r straeon hynny yn aml iawn yn yr sesiwn o'n i'n gryndo arno fe bore yma ynglyn â datblygu cymunedol. Mae'r honiad yma bod ni'n gwella cymdeithas a bod ni'n gwneud bod cynnydd a bod bywyd pobl yn well. Wel, mae gan y bobl yna, y bobl da ni'n siarad amdani nhw, stori werthfawr i'w hadrodd. A mae angen i ni fod yn gwrando ar y stori yna ac yn rhoi ffurf neu fframwaith o gwmpas y stori yna, achos mae gallu mynegu'r y profiad bywyd sydd gan y bobl dyn ni sôn amdani nhw. Mae hwnna'n ei hun yn werthfawr ac mae angen i ni wrando a dysgu o'r straeon hynny hefyd. Dwi'n cael yn haro gan rhai o'r straeon da ni wedi rhannu dros y flwyddyn ddiwetha. Chwalfa er enghraifft yn agor pontio fel prif ddarn drama gyda Theatr Genedlaethol yn cynhyrchu wrth gwrs yn unem y partneriaeth. Fe glywes i nifer fawr iawn o bobl yn coridorau ni yn dweud yn stori ni di hon, a pobl na fydden dod i'r theatr gan amla. Felly dwi'n meddwl bod rhaid i ni, mae gynnon ni ddyletswydd fel canolfannau, ac yn sicr canolfan newydd sydd eisiau agor i drysach bod ar agor o'r cychwyn i gymunedau, un cymunedau i gyd, yn bod ni a phlatfform i'r straeon pwysig yma sydd angen i dweud a ffeindio ffordd o'i deud nhw.
So having a story is if you pass that over to Ken, having a story is a powerful tool and has all kinds of extraordinary impacts, presumably.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to draw out. I agree, the art is not a panacea, it cannot solve all the problems of poverty, and nor should it aim to. And there are, I think, different ways that we've already talked about and highlighted where it can have an impact. And one of those is, I think, in terms of being able to tell stories, being able to ask questions. You know, it's a bigger question, what is the power of the arts against government, corporations, or at least in that space, to tell the stories of people in poverty. And it is one of the few ways in, arguably, some of the things that have happened to education. It's harder for people to get into a position where they can tell those stories in those spaces, venues, the media, conferences. But there is still, I think, a craving within the cultural sector, within consumers of culture for truth, stories, authenticity. And I think that still allows people who otherwise wouldn't be able to occupy those positions, wouldn't be able to ask questions to power, talk to power. I think the arts has a real opportunity for that still to happen, which doesn't necessarily exist in other parts of public life.
I want to stay with you now for a moment as we move this on, and I will come back later in this discussion to the question of political activism and the publicly funded arts, which I think is a really interesting question. There's a very bizarre effect here, Frank, but we have the words Arts Council of Wales in light on your forehead, which is giving me a really weird sense of your belonging to us. I feel very well. Thank you very much. We're very proud to have you. I'd like to dig a bit into the roots, starting with you, Ken, for artists and arts organisations of different kinds to reach out to our fellow citizens who are in the greatest poverty. I mean, what points of contact, what partnerships, what kinds of events work to make and sustain relationships with people in poverty? I mean, you know, I recently visited, as I said just now, Communities First Centre in Blaen, which has key partnerships with a local community arts organisation. But there will be different routes for different organisations. So starting with your Tetley experience, perhaps, what kind of points of contact work?
Well, it's something that's come up again and again, I think, today. It bears repeating, though. I don't think there is a single model or a single way of doing things. There are things to think about all the time and best practices. But I think it is the best way to look at it is at your organisation, at your art form, where you're based, at what you do, and then sort of go from there to look at where and who to engage with. A very large cultural organisation, a huge national organisation, might well have to look at all those characteristics, all those areas, even just thinking specifically about poverty. For us at Tetley, we've taken a particular approach. It might not be the only approach, but we think it's a rich approach. So we're quite new. We only opened about 3 years ago. And in that time, we're based, as you spotted, actually in the former Tetley Brewery, like many arts organisations in a former industrial site. And we focus our engagement on inner South Leeds, which is quite a few different districts. It is a more deprived area, but that's not the only reason we work in that area. It's our neighbours, lots of the people who worked on the brewery or the factories in the area which have gone, had a connection to the site. So it's almost a natural constituency for us. And we're a smallish organisation, so we focus on that, which is a kind of a geographical approach. But within that, obviously, there are many different communities and many different ways we connect. And in terms of who we connect with, it is quite varied, but we find as a small organisation with small resources, we can have more impact by focusing on a particular area. So within that loosely defined geographical area, we work with schools, community groups, the local authority in the area, and it's an ever ongoing journey, and we make new connections, reconnect with old connections, but that's a way that we think we can have an impact, even with within our limited means.
And I suppose the authenticity of the practice spreads by word of mouth.
Yes, well, in different basic ways. Certainly word of mouth. Once I think people, community groups are quite likely very, very savvy. We're not a community arts organisation, we're a venue, but they know we can offer things to the people that they're working with, to the children, the young people, the community participants. And so we find people are keen, and then once we know that we kind of mean it, and we're trying to do things on a deeper level, it does start to repeat itself, and people get back in touch with you and pass you on to other groups, other organisations. People come to general programming. So I mean, it's an ever ongoing process that requires constant sort of working and reworking, but we do find it does happen, and has a real impact.
I'd like to come to Ellen next. You use a key word there, which is venue, and I know Guy will have something to say about this too. The question of the venue and breaking down the walls, the perception it's not for me, it's not for us. It's that glorious, stunning white building on the hill. So how do we deal with that?
Wel, o'n i ddim yn meddwl bod fi'n mynd I ddeud hyn, sef cydnabod bod yna rai manteision o agor 14 mis yn hwyrach na ddyliau ni wedi gwneud. Mae rhai ohonoch chi falle yn ymwybodol bod Pontiac wedi agor mis Rhagfyr diwetha, ond oedd fod agor 14 mis yn gynharach. Ond be alluogodd hwnna I ni wneud oedd treulio cyfnod estynedig gyda phrosiect cyfranogol blas sy'n datblygu sgiliau perfformio yn ysgol Blancegin sy'n nghalon ardal cymuned yn gyntaf rhyw filltir a hanner o ganolfan Pontio. Ac yn sgil hynny, datblygu partneriaeth clos iawn gyda'r ysgol, ond ddim yn unig gyda yr athrawon, gyda'r cymorthyddion oedd yno yn rhan o'r prosiect gyda'r tiwtoried wythnos ar ôl wythnos in kind, os liciwch chi, felly yn rhan o'r prosiect. Ar ddiwedd cyfnod estynedig o fod yn mynd mewn i'r ysgol dro a thro a phlant yn mynychu sesiynau wythnosol ar ôl ysgol felly, dod I nabod y rhieni gan bwyll bach. A Mared, y cydlynydd ar athrawes, neu'r tiwtor drama, yn cael ei galw yn Mared Pontio. Lle mae yna rhywbeth ar droed yn fanna, does? Mae yna rhyw greu perthynas, mae yna elfen o ddatblygu ymddiriediaeth, a mae yna gweld Mared fel rhywun oedd yn cynrychioli yr adeilad mawr ar y bryn. Ac yn sgil hynny, yn un peth, cael yn gwahodd wedyn i eistedd rownd y bwrdd fel aelod o bartneriaeth Maes Gyrchen, sef yn rhan o'r gymuned. Ac felly nawr, fel staff, da ni'n rotatio un aelod i'r llall, mae pob un aelod o staff artistig a marchnata yn mynychu y bartneriaeth bob 6 wythnos. Felly mae Pontio wrth y bwrdd ac yn rhan o gymuned Maes Gyrchen yn y drafodaeth.
Well, it certainly helped to have that stunning and controversial walk-in sculpture halfway up the hill, which is a great place for school people gathering at the end of the day. I've been there, and it's wild. It's a great place. Guy, I'm interested in these points of contact, you know, because obviously you come from a theatre building, but your work is not confined by that, but it's a great resource and has power and attraction in itself. And you work in the community in different ways, but how do you get how do you get past this perception that you're just another professional agency, you know, like somebody from the social services?
Yeah, okay, I think that's a fair point. I think that comes off often with project-based funding, where you may be time-limited in terms of your approach. I think, again, when you have the first conversations with members of the public you want to engage with, you tell them that. We don't have anything to hide. I'm quite genuine in terms of, we want you to come to the theatre if you've never come before. We realise you face barriers. Let's discuss it. Have an open conversation, but then we try and work with our members in a variety of different ways. So we may have members who are blind, wheelchair users, families that don't get engaged with the theatre, people that want to see stand-up comedy, all the kind of the provision the venue has. We have conversations with lots of different people to access the venue. And then what we do in our venue, we are part of a thing called the Spice Time Credits Network, which is a community currency model which supports volunteering across the UK. In our venue, you can spend 2 time credits per person per performance, but what the Time Credit Network also helps us to do is we have volunteers who are part of the Sherman 5 membership. So broadly speaking, they're quite diverse. So they support us, and they are ushers in our venue. So some of them are wheelchair users, so we're learning about how to support wheelchair using ushers when there's a fire, so that's a new area for us to work on. Some of them are deaf, which are brilliant when they support other deaf audience members, and they'll be able to use BS language. My BS language skills are really poor, so it means that audiences, again, that might face barriers, see someone that's like them, supporting them to come into the venue. We have ethnically diverse reps. We've got Taz and Beth, who are over there, so Taz was in the video. They do a lot of work with me, and I think it's about people that may face barriers and disadvantage, seeing someone in some way that is like them in the venue. They can obviously chat to anyone in the venue, but they can approach those people, they can chat to them, they can say, is it going to be long? Am I going to be here a while? Is it boring? Is it exciting? They can have quite open conversations. And again, it's about working with our members for them to be honest about the relationship they have with the venue. We've got 13-year-old kids in schools across Cardiff who say to other 13-year-old kids, I went to the theatre last night, and their mates will go, why did you go to the theatre? That's weird. And they'll go, no, actually, it's really cool. There's really good stuff happening. So they are our advocates. They are the project. So we try and empower and work with them. I think it's really interesting learning today. We've been chatting quite a bit about organisational change. So there's been quite a lot of organisational change and learning for our venue, which I think when we keep, like Phil's mentioned quite a lot about, we're publicly funded, so we try to engage with the general public, and there we would pay a lot of money to actually employ them specialist audience development projects, but it's a conversation, it's a chat. So from then there's learning. Some of the learning we can put straight into practice. Some of it needs a bit more time and a bit more support, and may be really difficult to realise. But again, I think it's just about having that shared conversation and our members feeling as though they can come up to me or anyone in a building and say, oh, how about this? And can we try that? Or I don't know if that works. Or it's kind of breaking down those barriers again. But by having them act on behalf of the project and representing Sherman 5, I think we kind of, in a very realistic sense, represent the project's aims and objectives rather than me trying to convince people about going to theatre. They actually are interested in theatre for a diverse range of reasons, and we've had a lot of success in that. So I just wanted to say thanks to the guys for actually coming along today with me.
And these kind of contacts, though, are transformative for everybody because, you know, we were warned this morning about the dangers of being seen as the ones who come in to make an offer. You know, and to do the good. How is it transforming the Sherman to have this contact? I think
it's had a massive transformative effect. I think it links into, so some of my other colleagues are here today from the building, it links into box office, it links into the cafe bar, kind of learning about our food and drink offer. It links into our knowledge of public transport. It links into some of our tech staff. Like our tech staff put a lot of time into kind of supporting our members to come on stage and chat through their work. We've got colleague support some of our members to become youth theatre members. So we've got Sherman Sherbets, which is for younger children. We've got adult community drama. They can access through Sherman 5 all of that at half price. So they become participants through being audience members, and they're really engaged. A lot of our members we're training up to act as advocates, and they go out and present on behalf of the project. So it's a two-way process. We learn from them, they learn from us, and it's about kind of that shared learning, really. And I think as long as you're honest and open about that shared learning and the fact that we don't know everything, they don't know everything, we learn in that process together, I think it really strengthens our bonds with our audience, and they are quite happy to say they're part of the venue.
Thank you. Frank, I'd like to explore a little bit with you on the subject of poverty in families. Because clearly we've already heard from Ellen about the importance of the way the school children sometimes bring the parents in, and so on and so forth. And yet there's this interesting dynamic. It plays differently in different ages, doesn't it? There are key moments when you need parents and children together, and then sometimes when you've got teenagers seeking independence, there needs to be a different pathway for them. Are poverty involvements and agencies involved in poverty fully understanding these dynamics, and are they working closely with them?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's definitely been a big move, well, not a big move, but actually a moderately sized move recently into the kind of field of family learning. And that's, at the moment, largely focused on kind of employability skills and sort of trying to create settings where children and their parents can kind of together improve, whether it's numeracy or literacy, with the hope that that kind of improves poverty outcomes. I'm not so far familiar yet with anything that's been done in the artistic field, but the Learning and Work Institute is the one pioneering this, and it might be worth kind of having a discussion with them. I would just also wanted to think about families in relation to the point about contact and how you manage contact. Because I guess one of the things that's come through very, very clearly from our research is how loath people are to even accept the definition of them being poor. You know, they will use a million other words before they will even settle on I'm poor. And there's kind of something about, and maybe you guys are already grappling with this, you know, how you describe your project and what you're trying to do, and because that in itself implies a definition of them that they may reject quite wholly. I mean, it would be humiliating for a parent to kind of turn up at a kind of workshop that was, you know, for low-income families, just in terms of how they would appear to their children. So there's a whole amount of sensitivity that kind of needs to happen within that space if you're going to kind of work with families. And as you also alluded to, I think what a lot of research shows is that it's probably easier when the children are younger. The kind of most valuable work when it comes to teenagers is often, you know, maybe their experiences in brilliant at school. These kinds of projects do provide an alternative way or forum for them to kind of engage with supportive adults, and that can itself be a huge boon to their own development and how they kind of relate to the wider world as well. But that's about actually not teachers and not parents being present. So it does absolutely depend on the group and who you're trying to work with.
You might sometimes, Ellen, get a kickback from a family saying you've interfered by getting involved, my kids involved with the arts.
Ie, wi'n meddwl o fod wedi mynd mewn i ysgol Blancegin, yn bod ni wedi meddwl, da ni'n mynd mewn i ysgolion lleol, fi o'n i mewn ysgolion eraill hefyd, felly oedden ni'n gwahaniaethu, oedd o'n rhan o'r prosiect. Felly dwi'n meddwl fydde y rhieni ar y pwynt yna wedi synhwyro bod ni'n gwneud o'n arbennig i'r grŵp yna efalle. Ond beth o'ch chi'n gweud ynglyn â profiad rhieni, profiad negyddol rhieni o fod yn yr ysgol. Oedd hwnna'n rhywbeth ethon ni ar ei draws, pan oedd rhieni'n dod nôl i bigoi plant i fyny ar ddiwedd sesiwn, oedd Mared a'r tiwtoriaid yn clywed hanesion ynglyn â'u profiad nhw o addysg wrth basio. A oedd hwnna'n rhywbeth oedden ni ddim wedi disgwyl, oedden nhw ddim wirioneddol eisiau treulio amser yn yr ysgol oherwydd bod nhw bod hwnna'n dod yn ôl, oedd hwnna'n rhywbeth. Y peth arall fydden ni'n gweud hefyd ydy pa mor bwysig ydy o bod y gwaith da ni'n neud efo phlant efallai sy'n dod â deuluoedd mwy difreintiedig, bod na gydweithio hefo plant o ysgolion neu o ardaloedd sydd ddim yn dod neu'n byw mewn clodi. Felly pan oedd Blas fel prosiect yn symud mewn i ganolfan Pontio, oedd yn cael ei agor i fyny i bawb. A'r sgil effaith, dwi'n meddwl y gwaith Blaen Llaw, oedd yn y diwedd beth oedd chi'n cael, oedd cymysgedd iach o bawb yn dod ac yn profi'r celfyddydau. Felly allan o'r 74, mae 20% o'r 74 yn digwydd dod o ardaloedd difreintiedig. Felly mae yna gymysgedd iach a fel y ddylai fod, ddim bod ni'n gwahaniaethu pobl.
Diolch. Let's bite the bullet then about the key thing for... That's what biting a bullet sounds like. The key thing for the publicly funded arts, politics. I mean, the question is really, does the artist inevitably have to become a political activist when dealing with experiences of the poor? I mean, is there any alternative to the committed position and issue campaigning of a Ken Loach? How do you deal with the tensions that this raises with essentially apolitical public funding? I mean, obviously, in some sense, all art is political, but we know what we're talking about here. We're talking about much more focused and partisan responses. We're talking about this is what I'm finding in this patch, and this is the story that I want to help tell as I work with the people here and with the local people and make their voice heard. And really, I just want to help them sing their song and make their political point. I mean, does that create, for you, Ken, does that create problems for you as someone who receives public funding?
Well, I think it's worth considering, just like you said. I mean, in one way, all art is political, and to sort of expand that out, all funding in whatever way is political, even if you are funded by donations by your visitors, for example. You know, if you're an institution of one form or another that isn't grown out of the community, and even, you know, a community arts organisation might only represent one sector of the community, for example. So it is all political, and doing any action which is in some way participatory, where you, to a greater or lesser extent, are working with people to deliver projects, services, by its very nature, part of the action you're doing is that imperfect democracy, you know, but which is still powerful than many of the alternatives. So I don't think you can avoid politics. I think it's important to be honest about why you're working in a particular area, why you've been given a particular bit of funding. I find generally, you know, if you have that healthy dialogue, again, working with community groups or organisations who want to improve the circumstances of their community, are generally quite pragmatic themselves. You know, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. Obviously, it is you know, a delicate balance where they, you know, a group, a individual might have a particular point they want to make, which those in power might not want to hear. But I think one of the powerful things about art is it can be, not all the time, it can be a space which allows that in a way that can crack through kind of hard ideological situations or entrenched kind of positions, And I've seen some of that within projects within Liverpool, for example, some of the things around housing that were opened out because of a space of art to look at alternatives. I think it's also an important point to make out, though, in terms of politics. I think artists who are activists themselves, or those within media, documentary makers, journalists, have to be careful, because I've seen it, again, in Merseyside, where communities, areas end up being fodder for someone's point of view, left-wing and right-wing. I've seen that, where it's like, and often, the same group will be used to make different left-wing or right-wing points of view. So it's important whose voice is making the political point. I think that's an important thing to consider.
Right, thank you. Ellen, I mean, the slice of the Cynhadledd is obviously we were hearing from Francois earlier about participatory activity generally, and participatory art is different, and we're talking about the art here, but when the art is dealing with experiences and strong voices being raised by people of extreme injustice and oppression, it's very difficult to adopt a position that isn't agit, perhaps.
Yr esiampl sy'n dod i'n feddwl i, a mae hwn rhai blynydde nôl nawr, ydy drama verbatim Bethan Marlow i Theatr Genedlaethol, nath deithio Cymru sef Sgint, ynde? Oedd yn adlewyrchiad o fywyd anodd yn stad Peblig yng Nghaernarfon. Ac oedd hwnna i fi yn bwerus tu hwnt. Dwi'n mynd ateb eich cwestiwn chi, dwi'n gwybod.
No.
Ond o fod yn eistedd yn y gynulleidfa gyda phobl oedd wedi cyfrannu at y narratif neu at y ddrama, oedden nhw'n clywed I lleisiau go iawn. Mi oedden nhw'n clywed I brawddegau go iawn. Ond be oedd yn ofnadwy o glyfar o'r hyn ddath allan o'r prosiect yna, oedd yr hyn ddath wedyn yn fy meddwl I, a'r ffordd y troed y sgint I rhywbeth oedd yn weithredol ac yn gofyn cwestiwn, sef prosiect cymunedol ddath ar gefn y cynhyrchiad, sgint I syniad. Ac oedd hwnna yn ei defnydd cadarnhaol o'r gair sgint ac yn rhoi pwer nôl yn nwylo pobl I wneud rhywbeth am eu cyflwr. Liciwch chi ddim cweit felly oedd hi, ond mae yna ffordd, mae'r celfyddyd yn gallu bod yn weithio'n llorweddol ac yn gallu symud pethau ymlaen falle mewn ffordd sydd yn rhoi cyfle ar pwer nôl yn nwylo pobl eto I ddatrys. Ydy o'n wleidyddol? Dwi'n gwybod. Mae o'n bydio.
Frank, you obviously at the Rhoi Foundation would have seen a lot of artistic response to poverty and work in disadvantaged and poorer areas. And when you look at this kind of work in the way we've just been hearing, I mean, is the key thing that there's a depth of engagement and a strength of a voice coming from the people themselves that the professionals are working with, that means that the story is well informed and has a rounded humanity about it, that it's not a reductionist piece?
It's interesting. So I'm kind of trying to think recently about sort of two major artistic projects I've watched that kind of dealt with poverty and kind of life on the margins, and they're both very different. So the first was obviously I, Daniel Blake, and the second, I don't know if anyone's seen it, is American Honey, which was really interesting because the vast majority of the cast members were kind of literally picked up on the streets and strip malls and so on, and were very much kind of representing their own lives and their own communities. It was very iterative, that plot. And, for me, American Honey was a far more successful and moving and illuminating project than I, Daniel Blake was, which painted in very bold primary colours. And it also struck me that I think I'm answering your question in a roundabout way, because I guess the point I'm trying to make is that when it comes to the publicly funded arts, I think the question you have to ask, in addition to the question of whose story are you trying to tell, is it the creators or those are the people who are feeding into it, it's also about your audience and what you're trying to do, because it's very easy to kind of create a bit of agitprop that a lot of Guardian readers will go and watch dutifully, and it will further fuel their outrage, but it will not appeal to that broader segment of the population that actually you need to engage. So I do think fundamentally the criteria has to be artistic, because that's the only way you're going to deliver value. If you can kind of bring stories from unfamiliar people and places to a wider audience, the only way you're going to do that is if the story is intrinsically good and interesting and compelling. And I have to say, kind of frankly, that a lot of the stuff that does try to do it, therefore doesn't do it very well. But this is my own personal experience. So, and it's why I sort of said at the beginning of this, that would just be my message. Just focus on the art, and you will still be true to people's experiences. That don't kind of get bogged down in politics too much. Thank you,
Guy. Do you find yourself taking sides?
I don't think so. I think I'd kind of like to echo what Frank said. There's elements of kind of what everybody said that I completely agree with. I think that it's really important for the artists to be politically motivated. I think audiences are politically motivated as well in the choices they make. Like our artistic director, Rachel Reedon, has programmed in brilliant Welsh writers like Catherine Chandler. She wrote a play called Bird about young girls leaving the care system. Gary Owen wrote a play called Iphigenia in Splot. So Splot is, if you don't know Cardiff, Splot's a community first area. It's about 20 minutes away from our theatre. Huge success, went to National Theatre England, came back to the Sherman, went to Edinburgh, toured. Loads and loads of our members talked about that play. They took our Effie as a real person. It's really, really important that we reflect our members, we reflect society on stage. So they adore that work, it really connects with them, it resonates with them, but they also go and see new contemporary opera by Music Theatre Wales as well. They go and see The Borrowers at Christmas. I think we need to kind of open up the palette of kind of artistic diversity that exists on our stages and the artistic provision that we fund, and say, come and see it. We've supported some of our members when they went to see Iphigenia and Splot. Gary Owen had a play called Violence and Sons on the Royal Court in London. That was about a month after the play in the Sherman. So we said, if we hire a bus, will you come? And they all said, yes, of course we'll come. So we all went on a bus to the Royal Court in London. Many of them had never been to the Royal Court, to London. We managed to arrange to have a tour, talk to the cast. Many of our members bought a play script and read a play script, and because the play connects to them and they saw an element of their lives reflected on stage, they're now massive fans of contemporary Welsh new writing, and the work has resonated with them on lots of levels. So I think politically motivated work is extremely important, as you've seen, and films like I, Daniel Blake, but they can also appreciate The Borrowers as a family production. They can appreciate Welsh language drama. I think it's about just letting them in, and they can then make their own choices about the work and what they choose to access. We found that our members want to access everything, so it's brilliant. So our Sherman 5 members are probably our most frequent attenders in our venue. Sometimes they say everything, so they're extremely culturally literate now. They know about different art forms, different genres. They'll quote people back to me. We'll talk. The amount of learning that's not intentional learning, it's just because they're interested, is phenomenal. So it's a pleasure really to support that. But I think, we need to support politically motivated artists. And I think our audiences are politically motivated, and so they should be. We're living in difficult times. So for them to come to the theatre and go, wow, that's the same as me, that's the point of public funding, I think. That has to happen.
Fantastic. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you guys all to keep a favourite story about the arts and poverty for the very end, and I'm going to pass this around for a little while. So if I could, you've got one anyway. So whether it's a question or it may just be your own observation, any observations from the floor or questions?
Okay. Hi. I did ask something similar before, but it's came through a discussion we had at What Next in the Valleys. And Ellen and Guy, you've both talked about working in the community's first areas. And it sounds like the way you're engaging in those is really effective and is fantastic. And it's really about the response to the Secretary for Communities and Children's statement a month ago that he is minded to end Communities First. So it's really about what sort of response we have in terms of the arts sector in shaping whatever comes beyond the period of Communities First, which is, for those who don't know, the Welsh Government call their flagship method for tackling poverty in Wales. It feels like there's a moment now when we could try to have an impact in some way.
I'm very happy to open that out. I can offer something from my own experience of that, because when I went to Blaen, to the Community First project in the community centre there in the Ebw Valley, there was clearly some outstanding work being done, some outstanding practice.
I'll be with them at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Right. Yes. Well, they're fantastic people, and they're doing all kinds of great work. And clearly, when I was talking then to the AM about that work, to Alan Davis, who's also chairing the task force on the valleys, about that situation with Community First ending as a program, he said that they are strongly aware, and I was advocating for it, that there is practice by various streams of funding that needs to be sustained, even if they think the program in its present configuration is not completely fit for purpose, in their view. And I think the big practical question for a lot of fantastic work that's being done is how those new structures and streams of funding will work. And it's for everybody in their advocacy, it seems to me, to be pointing out the quality of the work that's being done. Anybody have any comments to add to that?
I think there's a range of online surveys online at the moment, which community groups and I think some of the Community First teams are leading on. I know that they publish some case studies with people who've been supported by Community First. They also, I don't want to plug my own project, but they're both members of Sherman 5 as well. So there's Sarah now works for Oasis, who support refugees and asylum seekers, and Rhian is a wheelchair user. The Western Mail published them over the last couple of weeks, so please do share those stories and add some comments. I was at the Dusty Forge, which is in Ely yesterday. They run a food bank and they had a meeting about the benefits cap. I think the Community First teams are generally brilliant. I love the way that they employ people that live locally to work with them and represent their own communities. But I think we just need to advocate and talk about the value that we give the staff and the cultural opportunities they offer local citizens. But there's quite a lot of information online that we could share and, as Phil says, act as advocates from our own organisations as well.
Thank you. Okay.
Yr unig beth o'n i'n mynd i ychwanegu ydy cyhoeddiad bore yma gan Ken Skates ynglyn â parhad rhaglen ardaloedd orloesi a rôl y celfyddydau yn hwnna wrth gwrs, oherwydd mae hwnna'n ymwneud efo trechu clodi a mae cymuned yn gyntaf yn aelod rownd y bwrdd. Felly mae'n y gwestiwn ynglyn â beth i cydberthynas y rhaglen honno hefo yr hyn sy'n digwydd efo cymuned yn gyntaf. Felly rhywbeth i ni ystyried.
Frank?
Yeah, I mean, so JRF doesn't take a formal position on the closure of Communities First, but what we would observe is, I agree, a lot of the Community First teams do brilliant work, but the main problem in Wales, or has been for a very, very long time, has been a lack of thinking within government about how to kind of connect economic strategy with poverty reduction. And we do think there is an opportunity with them putting less emphasis on a Communities First approach to kind of come up with something that's much more ambitious and would sort of lead in the long term to kind of far better outcomes. But like as our report, and I really urge you to read it, Prosperity Without Poverty, Wales Without Prosperity Without Poverty, makes clear that there's, as part of that, there's also going to be a huge role for kind of voluntary sector organisations, civic society organisations, artistic organisations to continue doing the sort of work they do. But I think, so my only message is, I know this is a time of uncertainty and that's always uncomfortable, but there is also an opportunity to kind of push the Welsh Government to do something much bigger than they've done in the past.
it is very striking sometimes in these organisations that you get that they do capture the evidence of impact very strongly. So you'll see pathways into employment, inclusion in mental health and so on, which is very strongly done. Yes, Yvette.
So, thank you very much, and thank you for your discussion. You focused a lot on getting people who are in poverty or out of the mainstream into your buildings and into the arts. But I'd really like to ask you a little bit more about the other side of it, which is how the arts tackle poverty. So what is it about the arts that can be transformative? And in your experience, where are the best interventions? Is it early years? Is it older? Where can you break that cycle of poverty? And how is arts better at it than other things?
I think what would be good if your answer to that became your final stories, okay? So why doesn't each of you give a story of the transformative impact, perhaps connected with those structural questions, which we were touching on earlier, about age groups, about points of contact, and so on, where the interventions have been most illuminating and powerful for each of you. Ellen, yn gynta.
Dwi'n mynd i gyfeirio at profiad diweddar iawn sydd yn gysylltiedig ar hyn dwi wedi bod yn gyfeirio ato fo hefyd, sef gweithio efo plant ac yn bennaf plant oed cynradd a dweud y gwir yn rhan o brosiect Blas. Yn ddiweddar iawn gaethon ni berfformiad neu ymweliad gan gwmni o'r enw Ballet Loro, cwmni theatr ddawns sydd yn dod o Newcastle, ac prosiect trioleg cyfres o berfformiadau, yr ail oedd yn dod ato ni, a gweud y gwir, straeon grym, sef Snow White. Ac yn gynnar ymlaen yn y trafodaeth ni gyda'r cwmni hwn, nes i sylweddoli i bod nhw'n gwneud rhywbeth oedd yn agos iawn at yn calon ni o ran ethos, sef dod â'r proffesiynol a gwaith a ansawdd arbennig hefo'i gilydd gyda'r cymunedol a'r cymryd rhan. A bod y ddau beth yn bodoli ar yr un continuum, bod dim unrhyw fath o doriad rhwng y ddau beth yna. Felly, be oedd hyn yn golygu oedd bod y cwmni yma yn dod ato ni rhyw 3 mis yn ôl i gyfweld neu i ddod o hyd i 12 o blant oedd erioed wedi perfformio ar llwyfan o'r Blaen, ac chwilio am dalent amrwd oedden nhw a deud y gwir. Felly'r hyn wnaethon ni oedd mynd i mewn i Ysgol Blaen Cegin i gynnal gweithdai, oedd yn glyweliadau a deud y gwir, a hefyd clyweliadau yn pontio i'r gymuned ehangach. Yr hyn ddigwyddodd oedd yn bod ni wedi recrwtio 12 o blant, fel mae'n digwydd 5 o ysgolion o Ysgol Blaen Cegin, o ardal cymuned yn gyntaf, a'r gweddill o'r gymuned ehangach. Mi oedd 3 o'r plant o Ysgol Blaen Cegin yn blant, dywedwyd wrth y cwmni a ninne na fydden nhw yn gweld y broses yma drwedd, a bod ni'n cymryd risg. Ac oedden nhw eisiau deud hyn wrthon ni, wel, ydych chi eisiau cario ymlaen efo'r risg yma, ta ydych chi yn mynd i gymryd plant felly fydde'n fwy tebygol o allu ymrwymo nhw a'i rhieni felly. Mi wnaethon ni barhau hefo y cyfeiriad oedden ni wedi bwriadu gymryd. Oedd yr cwmni yn gweld talent neu rhywbeth arbennig yn y plant yma, a mi oedden ni'n grediniol bod ni'n mynd i gefnogi'r cwmni, ac felly mi alwyd y plant yn ôl am recall. Wrth gwrs oedd yr iaith yma'n gwbl ddiarth i'r rhieni, oedd hwn yn broses o fynd â nhw ar siwrne. Dethon nhw i pontio, mi gaethon nhw fynd trwy recall, a mi oedden nhw'n rhan o'r cynhyrchiad ar ymarferion, y tec, y dres a 2 berfformiad. Ar ddiwedd yr ail berfformiad, fe ddath y rhieni allan o'r theatr hefo'r plant, a oedd yna goflaid anferth o flaen pawb. Oedd yn ffantastig, oherwydd oedd yn amlwg i fi bod hwn wedi cael effaith dwfwn ar y teulu yma, 1 allan o 3 yn enwedig. Ac mi drodd y tad at Mared a finne a dweud, diolch i chi am weld rhywbeth yn y mhlentyn ni, dydw i na neb arall wedi gweld o'r blaen. A mi oedd hynny'n Ond, beth sydd yn digwydd nawr? Ac wrth bod ni'n gallu gweud, wel, mae'r prosiect yma yn digwydd bob nos lun yn Pontio, fe fedrwch chi ymuno a blas, oedd rhywle gan y plentyn yna i fynd wedyn. A dwi'n meddwl mae'r wers fawr i ni gyd fan hyn ydy beth sy'n digwydd wedyn. Mae'r profiadau anhygoel, y traws, beth bynnag ydy'r gair Cymraeg am transformational, neu beth bynnag ydy o'n Gymraeg, dwi'n cofio, yn rhywbeth, mae gennym ni gyfrifoldeb i feddwl beth yw'r cam nesaf. A oedd hwnna i gyd i fi yn wers mowr.
I'm going to have to be brutal now and say you'll have to be very quick.
Okay.
But you know, thanks for that. And legacy and sustaining connection and sustaining development is so important. Frank.
So mine is much smaller, and I don't know if I'll claim transformational, but I actually believe that if you're going to solve poverty, it requires millions of lots of little steps. But so my day job is I spend most of my time trying to persuade politicians, whether in Cardiff or Westminster, Edinburgh or Belfast, to kind of do good things around poverty. And obviously in Westminster, it can be pretty tough, particularly with the kind of current government and the kind of governing ideology. And sort of engaging with Conservative ministers who have very, very fixed views about poverty can be impossible, and you can sort of marshal as much evidence as you want, but it's hard to break down some of those walls. Anyway, I was invited to an end-of-year party last year and got talking to a very, very, very sort of senior member of the cabinet, and he asked, where are you working? I said, oh, Joseph Rancher Foundation. I was like, oh, I don't know if I should be talking to you. So I said, I promise I'm not going to lobby. So we just started chatting, and he asked what I was up to, and I started talking about, well, I'd been reading the Booker shortlist, and one of the books on the Booker shortlist was Lila by Marilyn Robinson, part of the Gilead trilogy, which I don't know if you've read, but actually deals very deeply with kind of experiences of people right at the, the margins. We're talking about destitute communities who are itinerant. And he'd read it too, and we ended up having a really rich and useful conversation that sort of established some common ground, and I was then able to start building a relationship with him after that. And I think for me, that is the real power of art, that there are sort of, this ability to kind of help people empathize with others, and from very different walks of life, but to kind of have a common experience through art that then kind of improves both our understanding of it, and in my case kind of helped me do my job better, because he was then willing to kind of take briefings from me and use some of our arguments in various discussions he was having with colleagues. So, thank you, Marilyn Robinson, for that.
Thank you, Frank. Ken?
Just to mention two projects, not that I've had direct involvement with, but that I've been lucky enough to see it firsthand, that have, I think, quite a close interrelationship, both, I think, things that you'll have heard of. So the Granby 4 Street project in Liverpool 8, which I lived very close to for quite a while, which again, very well known, and also more recently having had the opportunity to visit the Rebuild Foundation in Chicago, which is, of course, founded by Fiesta Gates, again, very well known. And I think I picked them out and put them together as just kind of one example where I think those projects have enacted a kind of powerful change on a sort of micro level, those particular streets and blocks, which in many ways is a sort of comprehensive neighbourhood renewal project, which again the Roundtree Foundation will sort of be more familiar of, moving away from the arts. But arts were the catalyst in a way, or an artistic idea, or utilising that to tell a story, to think about things in a different way, to look at things differently, and how that's had an impact in how places are perceived, how people perceive themselves, the horizons that people look at about the potential for change, I think is quite powerful within those. And I think that art was certainly one of the catalysts within them. So I think that they're kind of powerful examples that I've been lucky enough to see.
Thank you. And Guy, very briefly and finally, thank you.
Okay, and specifically in response to how culture can solve poverty, I don't think it can. I think it can work together with organisations that support to help work with people that are living in poverty or face those issues. So, for example, one of our members was a mum who was really disengaged. She'd been supported by Community First, by the Spice Time Credit Network. She did some evening classes. She then did some parenting classes that Community First ran. She then did, I think, a BTEC. She's now doing a degree in social work. She's been a member of Sherman 5 for about a year and a half. And she sent me a message recently on Facebook just to say that thanks for being involved in the project, and she'd recently registered to vote for the first time as well. So I think by working in partnership with different organisations we can make people aware of new opportunities, and she's now engaged with democracy, which I think is a great thing. And she just sent me a quick quote the other day where she said, take the opportunity, I'm so passionate about Sherman 5, I just want to go up to the top of the mountain and tell everyone. So kind of those advocates for our project are just brilliant. It's a real pleasure to support them.
Fantastic. Many thanks. Wel, rhoi diolch i'r panel. A big thank you to the panel for their contributions today. Thank you very much indeed.